We have a smaller crowd today, which is great. That means a number of you, most of you have been with us over the last few weeks as we have been going through our new church's value statement, which is the Christ in me receives the Christ in you, the Christ in me responds to the Christ in you, and the Christ in us transforms the world. And I thought I have been preaching through this value statement, trying to orient our minds and the way we talk around receiving each other and responding well to each other and allowing God to transform the world. And so I have been preaching phrase by phrase through the series, and we have gotten near the end where I want to talk about transformation today. And as I got to this topic, I realized that I needed to do a little bit of Methodist self-criticism. When you go to the United Methodist Church's webpage and you look up the mission statement of the denomination, you will see that our mission is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And to be clear, I agree with what I think the intention of this statement is, but I don't like how it's worded. And if you've listened to me preach over the last few months, you'll probably guess why I don't like how it's worded. In that statement, who gets the verbs? We do. We are the actors. We are the ones who do things. The church is to make disciples, and somehow that disciple making results in the transformation of the world. And since God is not mentioned in this statement, it is assumed that we are really the ones doing the transforming. Now, to be fair, I recognize that this is a brief statement, and not everybody can say everything they want to say in a very brief statement. But the United Methodist Church falls in a long line of liberal white Protestantism and mainline Protestantism that likes to say things like, God has no hands but ours. Have any of you ever heard this statement? Okay, Ronnie, at least. God has no hands but ours. What's the assumption behind a statement like that? God does not act unless we do it. And I find that problematic. And so with that in mind, when we come to a statement and we get all the verbs, it sort of just sets something off in my mind that says, okay, I think we need to sit with this. And so again, I think I agree with what the intention of this is, but I think some self-reflection is in order, especially because when I look at the history of the church, and I look at what happens when the church tries to make sure that the world transforms, I don't know about you, but I feel pretty gross about it. I don't know about you, but I guarantee your children feel pretty gross about it. When the church tries to transform the world, it often stops looking like the crucified Jesus and often more ends up looking like Caesar trying to control things. And thus we have a history of Christians in the name of God and with the citation of the Bible, controlling other people to make sure that my vision of transformation is enacted. So we get white over black. We get men over women. We get Christians over other religions. We get Christians telling other Christians whether their votes matter or not. All in the name of it is my job to transform the world. And so to me, clarity matters. God calls us to make disciples, but God is the one who does the transforming. And that is why when we wrote months ago, when we wrote our Memphis First value statement, who gets the verbs? The Christ in us transforms the world. The Christ in us transforms the world. Our job is to discern where Christ is already working and then join in with what Christ is already doing. Our job is to discern where Christ is already working and then join in what Christ is already doing. So let's start here. This is a very practical sermon today. I am not always known for particularly practical sermons, but this is going to be a very practical sermon. How do we discern where Christ is working? We begin by noticing where life hurts, even when we can't solve it. I know that particularly the middle class folks in this room, we are solvers, are we not? We are fixers, are we not? We are the people who do things and get things done, and we have entire systems developed for how to fix someone, help something, get something arranged. We know how to do things. And so when we are confronted with pain that we cannot solve, we on a very personal level don't know what to do with that. And yet what I would like to argue for today is that it is precisely pain where you cannot solve it or fix it that Christ is inviting you to notice how God is at work. Because it is bigger than your ability to fix. This, I think, is the heart of the gospel. To follow the crucified Christ and the wounds of Christ that you can't heal. Here is the truth. You are most likely to notice the pain when it is in a place that you have been wounded to. Is this not what Marlon just said? Said, I experienced trauma, I experienced abuse, I experienced abandonment, I experienced homelessness, I experienced addiction, and then part of me noticing the wounds of the world was where God started pointing out the things that I had already experienced. When I was in my late 20s, to give you another example of this, when I was in my late 20s, my dad died. I don't know if I've ever told you all the story. I'm going to tell you two stories today that I may have told you at some point when I went off script. These are scripted, okay? These are scripted versions of the story. I was in my late 20s when my dad died. It was the first time in my life that I experienced really intense grief, the kind that sits on your chest and feels like it's choking you. And I remember I was standing in the visitation line, and all these people were coming through this line, greeting me and my siblings, and they all seemed to me like they wanted to solve the grief, like they wanted to fix it. My father is in a casket 2 feet from me, and somehow this group of people coming through this visitation line have determined that they are going to say the magical words to fix my grief and somehow transform it into something really that makes them comfortable. Because we don't know what to do with pain that we can't fix. And so I have never in all my life wanted to be in a visitation line. Later, when my mother died, I had already learned my lesson. I was like, we're not having a visitation line. We're not doing it. I'm not going to stand there for 2 hours while people come by and try to fix things for me that they cannot fix. So anyway, here I am standing in this visitation line with my dad, having passed away. And this elderly man came through the line, and a few years before, he had lost his wife. And where everybody else was trying to solve my grief, this elderly man comes up to me, and he gives me a giant hug, and then he pulls away, and he says, "The pain doesn't go away, but you do learn to live with it." And I cannot tell you the freedom that that gave me. When everyone else was simply trying to solve my grief and solve this problem, instead, he noticed where I was in pain, he connected it to where he had experienced pain, and he told me, this isn't going to go away. And that's normal. This is an unfixable pain. And that, my friends, was the most godly transforming moment at that visitation line. He noticed where there was pain because he had experienced it too. I think the church's job is to discern where Christ is already working in the pain, and then to join in what Christ is already doing. So if I ask the question, how do we discern where Christ is already working? We notice where it hurts, even when we can't solve it, we notice. But then once we have discerned where it hurts, and that Christ is at work in that pain, the question is then, how do we join that work? I love the way you said it. It was like anything that you would do for another human being, you can do in this ministry. Anything that you would do for another human being. Because I think really the answer to this question, how do we join Christ's work, comes to us more naturally when you are acquainted with the pain you're noticing. That statement, anything that you do for another human being, you can do for this ministry, that comes from somebody who knows that anything helps when you're in deep grief and trauma and pain. Anything helps. Jesus said this, right? A cup of cold water, give it in my name. It seems like such a simple thing, and yet it is the kingdom of God realized in this moment. Because in my understanding, our wounds train our eyes what to see. This is one of the difficulties of a comfortable life, right? This is one of the difficulties of a privileged life. Is that comfort and privilege train you not to see certain kinds of pain, to ignore certain kinds of pain, to not see it. But when you have experienced pain, it trains your eye to see and your heart to feel. It trains your hands how to respond so that it becomes intuitive. Anything you would do for another human being, you could do for the Christ in front of you who's suffering. So again, sorry if I've told you this before, but at the church that shall not be named, I had a boss who would call me into his office and berate me. Particularly because at my service I would sometimes talk about social justice things or race things or class things. I was in his office one day, and he says to me, "The only reason you preach the way you do is because you grew up poor." And now listen, I'm a contrarian. So it didn't matter to me in the moment whether he was right or not. He was wrong. And so I was like, no, No, you are wrong. I preach this way because I am faithful to the gospel. How dare you suggest that I have some other reason for preaching the way I preach? But later, I realized, despite the fact that I'm a contrarian, that he was actually right. My experience of growing up in poor rural Missouri, sometimes nearly homeless, made me sensitive to the pain of people who experience poverty. I see it in a way that not everybody sees it. I don't see it as clearly as some people, but I see it in a way that not everybody sees it. My experience of growing up with a single mother who endured abuse made me sensitive to the pain of women who are left out of systems, women who are abuse survivors, women who are lonely. My realization that my mother was the single hardest working person I ever met. And my mother could never make ends meet. That made me sensitive to the fact that there are working people who work harder than any CEO out there and still can't survive. That made me care deeply about working people, particularly lower class working people. When I hear politicians say things like, well, the government shouldn't feed your children, you should get a job, I thought, my mother had a job. Sometimes 2 or 3. The system doesn't work for poor people. This passion, this feeling, this sight comes from experiencing it. So sometime later when my boss said it again, the only reason you preach the way you do is because you grew up poor. At that time I realized he was right, and I said the only reason you don't preach the way I do is because you have to keep rich people happy. And it was not surprising I didn't stay at that job long. Your eyes are trained to see what they see. Your experiences and your pain train your heart and your hands to respond. Your hands know how to get involved when they have been wounded. Learn to discern where Christ is working and join in what Christ is doing. This is it. You're not responsible for the transformation itself. You don't, listen, you get involved, you do hard work, you be sensitive to people and their pain, you come up with plans, but at the end of the day, you can't fix everything. It's too big for you. But just because you can't fix everything doesn't mean you don't get involved. You should get involved in things that are bigger than you. That's when you have to learn to rely on the God who transforms instead of your middle-class sensibilities saying that you can fix everything. This is why I created the 5-day journals that show up every single week in your bulletin, right? Each week I am trying to teach you to notice, to see, to discern, to reflect on where pain is in your world, because it's there where Christ is working. To see that you can get involved in that work, that it's not your job to transform the world, but you also don't get to abandon it. This, I think, is the whole idea of what happens at this table. At this table, God does not stand at a distance seeing the pain of the world. God joins in and participates in the healing. Joins in so intimately that God experiences the pain in God's very body. I wonder what it would look like for a church in downtown Memphis on 2nd Street to feel the pain of our neighbor so intensely that we feel it in our bodies. Not just as an empathy that we feel in our hearts, but that we feel compelled to feel with our bodies and get involved in, not in unhealthy ways, but in ways that say, my neighbors matter because they're created in the image of God and they're human beings worthy of dignity. We don't come to this table with anything solved. We don't come to this table with anything to fix. We don't come to this table as transformers who get the first verbs. We come as hungry people who are ourselves being transformed. We are recipients of transformation, people God is still shaping, and the one message we have is that God is inviting the entire world to experience the transformation that I am just now starting to feel deeply. I'm not a white Messiah saving you. I am a person who needs saving, telling other people who need saving that there is a God transforming the world who can transform all of us. And so here at this table, we learn again what it means to discern where Christ is working, and then we are called when we leave here to join in what Christ is doing.